Yesterday I made a video, or I recorded a video about making a controller for a generic crane. So you should just be able to use this and slap it onto any crane and get you going. And I built this crane, but I never really explained how this crane should be set up. So here's the video really quick. And now I'll show you how to build this crane to work with this generic crane controller in a way that actually makes sense. First I'll get a base. It'll be a good idea to have a base. We want a base for this because of the boom. This is a boom extension crane. In the floor, first thing you want to have is your velocity pivot, and then from this you'll need some kind of base to go on the velocity pivot, and this is where you want to add a lot of weight. In this case what I'm going to do is use barrels, the battle cannon barrel extension, run them along the side of this base piece. The next kind of pivots we're going to use are the robotic pivots. If you use the compact robotic pivot, you can see it's got a motor force of 200, and you would have one on each side, so you have a total motor force of 400. The bigger ones here are the same. They have motor force of 200. Using robotic pivots is the easiest thing to control, but if you found that your crane was for some reason unable to lift something, you could go to a velocity pivot, which has a motor force of 1000, so multiply it by 2000 motor force. It's just a lot harder to control, and I haven't found it to be actually necessary yet. So I'm going to use the fluid pivot, and we need one on each side. The reason I want to use fluid pivots is kind of just get myself in the habit, in case I ever needed to put like a hose, some kind of hose extension on the end of my crane, then the piping is already here. We'll need a bar to connect these two. So using the merge tool, connect both the internal parts of those pivots to make the boom section. And then the boom uses the compact linear tracks. You only need one of these. This is just to provide the movement. The heavier your crane becomes, the more you might want to add. And then you stretch out the linear track as far as you want your boom to come out. Then just using a normal block or any other kind of block you want to use, extend out the top part, and so that's your boom, the extension part of your boom. To stabilize this and help it stop in the right position, we're going to use the sliding connector track and grippers. So the grippers will be attached to this rear section here, and I need a hard point for this as well, so I'm going to set a hard point as the middle piece, and then I can connect my grippers to that. So when you look at the merge tool, this yellow piece is going to run along the blue piece, and then using the big hard point body, I'll need a little bit of a lip there on the back that connects onto the blue piece, and so that's what keeps the boom extension in place when you're moving. Otherwise all this stuff is likely to wobble about. The next thing you probably want to do is have a hard point somewhere, anywhere on the boom. It could be right up the front like on this one. Put this in the floor and then attach the hard point below it. Or it could be at the back. It doesn't really matter because the hard point is going to lock it into position completely wherever it is. So now you can see the red is the base. We've locked the blue segment from going up and down, and we've locked the yellow segment from coming in and out. It'd be a good idea as well to lock the green segment from rotating. In the floor, I'm going to add another one of these hard points. And then we'll put the attachment piece in the middle. So it'll be able to rotate over that, but it's locked in place. That's the general crane. The next thing we need is some way to control it. And this can be a seat, one of these seats that has the composite seat data output. So the compact pilot seat, the control handle, driver's seat, helm, pilot seat HOTAS, and I think the space seat can also do it. You could convert the harness's Boolean logic to control the crane. There's probably enough outputs here that you could do something with that. The other thing is you would be able to use the remote control unit. You'd be able to use this because this has all the buttons we're using. So I'm going to use the compact pilot seat. So now I'm going to get my generic crane controller. It's pretty big and there is some space on here for other things. I've got 3 empty nodes up here. If you wanted to reconfigure it, I could move these two down here, but it's set up so that everything's kind of in little groups of 3. The other thing with this, how I've set it up, is I'm using an instrument panel and either a button or a flip switch, a toggle button or a flip switch. And so over channel 1, I'm taking this data into this control panel, and that is what is locking and unlocking the crane. The other composite node is the seat connection. And on the seat, we need to make A and D, W and S, left and right, and up and down all 100% reset sensitivity. Everything else can stay the same, and then we can start connecting all these things. So I'm going to move this instrument panel out of the way for now. So first thing, we've got A and D swivel. That is what is connecting to the velocity pivot on the very bottom. A and D swivel current rotation also goes to the current rotation on the velocity pivot. A and D swivel lock, this comes to the release on the hardpoint. And then A and D swivel ordnance type comes to the ordnance type on the hardpoint. Next, we've got the WS pivot. This will go to both of these pivots. And then WS pivot lock is this thing down on the front, and that goes to that release. And then the ordnance type goes to the ordnance type. So basically how these hardpoints are working is if it's connected, then it will be sending a ordnance type of 1 into the microcontroller. Next thing we've got is the LR boom. So I'm controlling the in and out, the extension of the boom with the left and right arrow keys. And that's what connects to the linear tracks. Then there's the LR boom lock, and that goes to the release on the hard points, on the hard point at the back here. Then we've got the LR boom brake, and that goes to the brake on the grippers. And then the thing I haven't added yet is a winch. So you want to attach your winch to this yellow piece that's sliding out. And this will work for any of the winches. Got winch up, which is winch in. And then the winch down, I can connect to the next one along, I think. Winch down or winch out. And then winch signal goes to this middle one. If you wanted to connect something up now, you would probably want to use an electrical anchor. Maybe a maggle. This is the most basic kind of system. Make sure you cut it away from the main grid. What you do for these is you take this on-off input from the little nubby bit on the electrical anchor and you connect it into the maggle. And then if you want, you connect the maggle into the electrical anchor. And that gives you the feedback so that when this is connected, you can receive that signal. I've got infinite electricity on, so I don't need to connect any of this, but you would connect these two together at least. The electrical connection comes through the rope, so you don't need to connect it like this. You would just connect your crane up normally and leave these two separate as long as they're connected with the rope anchor and the rope nodes are connected. So as it spawns, it's all locked in place, ready for transit. If I flick this switch, everything unlocks. W goes up, S goes down. When I'm not pushing either of those, it stops. A will swivel to the left. When I let go, it'll stop, and D will swivel to the right. Pushing left is what extends it, and pressing right is what brings it back. And when you let go of either of those, it'll stop. When you press the down arrow, the winch comes down. It's very slow at the moment. And when you press the 1 key, the maggle should turn on. So now when I press 1, the maggle will turn on. Oh, I've connected the wrong one. This one here that's LR boom ordnance type needs to come up to here. I tried to make it simple, but I can't even follow my own instructions. The reason it works like this is, let's say you're extended out over in some funny position like this, and there's this building right here that we're not at risk of hitting right now, but there might be some kind of situation where you're at risk of hitting something. When you turn the reset back off, it retracts down and spins around. And then once it's over its original position, it'll drop down. Well, I figure you're less likely to hit anything if you reset in that order, but you could change it if you wanted to. So yeah, that's how you would set up a crane, or that's how I would set up a generic crane. The way I've done it in the microcontroller is that I've tried to organize these nodes into the same place. So Everything that connects into the A and D swivel, the very first pivot you put down, are all down this row. Then the WS connections are in the next section, and then the left and right extension are all in the next section. So it's like a set of 4, a set of 4, a set of 2, and then the winch controls are up at the top here. The top 3 nodes could be used for something else. If you didn't like how the hardpoints were snapping together, you could detect if your crane has reset by checking the current rotation on the velocity pivot and the robotic pivots, and then you could use grippers and tracks instead, which might be a bit more of a smoother option, but it does require a little bit more goofing around with maths. And now we'll have a look in the microcontroller. Everything is coming off the seat, and then there's this control panel, which is the instrument panel just for the flip switch. If you wanted, you could replace this and all its connections with a normal on-off input if you wanted to use a key or a button. And this composite switch box here is doing a lot of the work. Essentially, when you flip that switch, it is allowing the seat composite data to go through this one switch box, and then that's getting sent out to all the different sections. The thing up the top here, this is controlling the winch up and winch down. So what's happening is we're bringing in the composite signal from the seat, and we're looking for channel 1. When you press channel 1, it's going to turn on the winch signal, which is giving you that mag-all connection. That works regardless of if the switch box has been activated or not, because I was thinking that if you had something connected and you didn't necessarily want to drop it, or if you wanted to secure the mag-all while you're in transit, it can be on its own system and you can sort of control that. But coming through the switch box, we're reading composite channel number 4, which is up and down on the arrow keys. We're at 100% reset on the seat, so we're checking for a low value of 0.1 and a high value of 1. Basically, that's separating all the values slightly above 0 up to 1. And then on the low end of the threshold, we've got negative 0.1 to negative 1. And so that's grabbing all of the values on the negative end of our up and down arrow input. So you can imagine it like this is detecting the up arrow and this is detecting the down arrow. And then they just go straight out into the winch up and winch down. And I'm using the same kind of idea with the thresholds on the whole thing. The next thing down here, we've got the A and D swivel, so it's the main crane rotation. That's being read on channel 1, which is A and D. And then again, it's going into a threshold. And then the threshold is going into a counter. I like to do it this way because you can control the speed of the rotation with the min and max values here. If you want to make it go faster, increase that number, and if you want to make it go slower, decrease them. So if we wanted to make this crane go twice as fast, I would change this from negative 0.02 to negative 0.04, and this one from 0.02 to 0.04. Then using a NOR gate, so not A or D, it's going to reset the counter to 0, so there'll be no output to the velocity pivot. This thing at the top here, this is detecting the current rotation, and then the function is clamp floor x plus 0.5 minus x, and then clamping it between negative 0.02 and 0.02, so that's to give it the same speed when it's resetting itself as the counter is when you're in control. They feed into a switch box, which is detecting if that control panel flip switch has been turned off or on, and then it finally outputs to the swivel. And below that is the ordnance type for the hardpoint for when it gets locked in its travel position. This little group of locks down here, these are the releases on the hardpoints. So whenever that control panel flip switch has been turned on, all of those hardpoints release, which allows the crane to move. The next section here is the WS, so this is the boom up and down pivot. This is reading on comp channel 2, which is W and S. Essentially, this top threshold is detecting W and this bottom one is detecting S. When the top threshold is pressed, we're counting up, and the increment value here is the speed that this boom moves up and down. The min is the lowest position that the boom can be in, and the max is the highest position it can be in. I went with 0 and 0.9 because I feel like 0 and 1 is a bit too extreme. 1 would be 90 degrees directly up. There's no reset on this counter because I'm checking to see if the ordnance type for it swiveling, and down here the ordnance type for the boom being retracted, if both of those are true, so if it's retracted and swiveled to its original position, it'll start counting down, and that lets it count down at the same rate that the user has control. Doing it this way means it's never going to suddenly snap into position. It's always going to slowly move itself back as if the user was doing it, but it's going to have that precision of a robot, so it's going to end up in its original position. And there's just output to the WS pivot node. And the final thing below here is the boom extension, which I'm controlling with the left and right buttons. So channel 3 is left and right, and then we're using a threshold, so we've got the left button here and the right button here. When you press the left button, it's allowing it to count up. Linear tracks move at any number. I want to move it at the fastest speed that it can possibly go in both directions, which is minimum -1 and maximum 1. And that outputs into the linear track. This thing here, where we've got an OR, that is detecting if the right button, the right arrow key has been pressed, or this thing down here that it's locked into position and the key is not active, because we want to reset the linear track whenever we're not using it. We want to reset its output number. If you don't reset the value you're sending to a linear track, it'll use electricity, so it could drain all your electricity, kill your battery just from sitting there not doing anything. So when you've stopped inputting a number, when you've stopped pressing left and right, it's coming through here and it's detecting NOR, so it's detecting not left or not right, and then it's detecting if that button has been pressed. So if the button is on, the control panel button is on, and not left or right is being pressed, then it comes through into this other OR gate and that resets the control. So when you let go of left or right, it sends a 0 number out to the boom, and it also engages the left-right boom brake, and that goes to the gripper tracks. So those grippers are what's stopping it from sliding up and down when you're not telling it to move. The other way you could do this is with distance sensors. I'm not sure if that would actually drain electricity using a distance sensor, but using a gripper means that your tracks also won't pivot out when they get very far extended. I can show you an example of that. This thing here is my NSR rail crane, probably the first crane I really built. This does not use grippers to stabilize. Instead, it uses 12, I think, 12 linear tracks to try and stabilize it. So this is at the very extreme end of trying to stabilize a crane. If, for instance, I lose these linear tracks on the side here, and then we're only using the up and down tracks, cut away a lot of this crane to show you how many linear tracks are actually being used in this to try and keep it stable. It's got 6 on the top, 6 on the bottom, and then it had 6 more up the front. There's a lot of linear tracks in this crane just to try and keep it steady. It does work, it's just a lot of linear tracks. There's also no brake system in that. I think I did end up using a distance sensor for that crane. But with this, by using the linear track and the gripper together, you only need 1 linear track just to get it to move, and then the grippers will hold it in place so you can be fully extended without it tilting, and it stops it from sliding backwards as well. So it's a much more compact solution than using a distance sensor. That's the main reason I like it. If I get rid of these grippers, it might show you what happens. You can kind of see this track is jittering a little bit. Without the grippers, it's got nothing to really support it in that position. So it is trying to slide back. It's actually doing a much better job of staying in position than I thought it would. You can kind of see here, it's tilting forwards a little bit, which will be why it's jittering. So having that weight on the end of the maggle is trying to pull the very tip forwards. When it has grippers on here, the grippers are connected to the tracks and they won't let it get off position basically. They won't let the extended part of the boom tip away from the main part of the boom. So even if you were going to use a distance sensor to keep it in an exact position, I would still recommend you use at least 1 track and 1 gripper to keep it straight. So yeah, That is a generic crane controller. I'll upload this vehicle here, so you've got an example with the crane controller already connected to everything, and I'll also upload just the controller. I've been wanting to build a lot more cranes lately, specifically for a rail crane and more cranes to go on the carrier cat. Just a lot of cranes for some reason, so having this generic crane controller just gives me a good place to start from without having to reset up all the logic over and over again. I won't be updating this controller if I make any modifications, but if I end up with a slightly better variation of crane controller in the future, I'll have another controller uploaded in addition to this one. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.